Hello and welcome to episode 103 of Third and Wrong. I'm your co-host Stephen Bolin, and I'm joined as always by Austin Dowlonga. We're really fired up to bring on the offensive coordinator and QB coach of the Lethbridge Junior Cougars, Matthew Sentes. Matthew, thank you for joining us, man. We're going to have a good discussion on analytics, something that's desperately needed on this podcast, as we sometimes come in with our preconceived biases and notions, and we're really excited to kind of get a good full encompassing view on analytics and how it applies to the game of football. Before we get into all that, why don't you tell us your coaching background and kind of what got you into the analytics realm of things?
For sure. So I was very lucky when I was in high school. My high school offensive coordinator was the head coach of the Lethbridge Steel, which is the women's football team here in Lethbridge. And I, being a part of a Catholic high school, needed 40 hours of community service. So I reached out to him and I asked him if I could help coach. I love football, and I was like, this would be a really easy way to get my community service hours. He was very kind to me and let me come out. And he, to this day, is still easily my football mentor. I talk to him weekly about football, bounce a lot of ideas off him, and I'm very lucky to have him as a part of my football world. And then based off of that, I coached that Lethbridge Steel for 6 years, I believe. I coached Catholic Central High School in Lethbridge for 3 years, which was my alum. And then I moved out to Manitoba, coached at Steinbach Regional for 1 year, came back to Lethbridge, coached the Lethbridge Junior Cougars for a year, and now I'm at the Lethbridge Collegiate Institute as an analytics coach, and we'll see where it takes me in terms of actually coaching.
That's awesome. That sounds like a very diverse background and many different stops. So, at what point in your coaching journey did you start to look at analytics as more of like, okay, hey, not only is this taking a predominant role in professional and collegiate sports, but this is really, when did you realize, hey, I can apply this to junior high school sports and semi-pro?
Yeah, so that's still happening right now for sure. I think the first time was when I was out in Manitoba. I just kind of got into betting in the NFL, and I didn't want to just blindly bet on games. So I was trying to create very basic models to bet. And looking back on them, the variables that went into them were like penalties and a lot of stuff that doesn't necessarily really matter game to game. And from there, I just started looking up some different things, and all of that stuff was very rudimentary. And then coming out here, I started doing my master's of science and management as a finance major. And with that, there's a lot of analysis in terms of financial data. And along that time, I found the NFL Scraper, which is all the NFL play by play data, which is what most of the NFL analytics community uses. And from there, I just kind of started applying what I was learning in my master's with this new data set I found. And then from there, I've just kind of exploded into, hey, what can I actually do with this? How can I apply it to high school and especially Canadian football? The 3 down game versus the 4 down game, completely different. And just really trying to see what's the same and what's different. And that's really where I'm at right now, is trying to apply more of that youth sports CFL data than the NFL data.
That's awesome. And so I hope that I'm coming in loud and clear still. I missed probably the first few minutes of conversation. Sorry, you guys. But I just because of my lag, listeners, I'm not slacking off here. But anyway, so I was checking out your website there, bigplayaction.wordpress.com. Go check it out. And there's some really cool segments there. And so just something that I wanted to kind of talk about, there's some controversy that happened in the playoffs this past NFL season with, or maybe not controversy, but either way, Matt LeFleur going for the field goal when they were down 8 late in the game in the NFC, was that the championship game? Oh, yeah. Wow, too. So he went for the field goal to go down 5 instead of going for the touchdown in the red zone there, which kind of brings me to this all-encompassing question. That's punting and kicking field goals versus going for it on fourth down, where what are your kind of thoughts, or what have you done in terms of analysis that you can shed light on for our listeners in terms of the coaching decisions that go into those?
For sure. So a lot of those decisions that are on public NFL analytics pages use win probability, which is essentially where they're using a logistic model, which is simply a sort of regression, more or less. And they're trying to find out the probability of a team winning at a certain point, given the score difference, field position, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of stuff that you would think would go into those models. The problem with that is each person's model is going to have different variables included, and that's going to lead to a lot of different outcomes on that. So I believe for the most part, the decision you're referencing with Matt LeFleur there, the different models I saw had it as mostly a go decision, but not a very strong go decision, meaning if the win probability suggests like a 2 or 3% go for it as opposed to a field goal, what does that really mean? Because one might have it as a toss up, one might have it as a 1% field goal, one might have it as an 8% go. And all it is which variables are going into it. So that I wouldn't say there's necessarily a true 100%, this is the model we have to use on it. And because of that, there's a lot of debate even within the analytics community about what the proper decisions are. There's going to be some egregious ones. I'm thinking Tennessee Titans versus Baltimore. Fourth quarter, Tennessee was down in the AFC playoff game this year, and they punted from the Baltimore side of half. That, I think, according to one model, was like 12% win probability. So if you go into a game thinking, okay, we have a 50-50 shot at this game, that one decision put it from 50-50 to 38-62, which is crazy.
Wow.
But in terms of that NFC Championship game one, I don't think there's that big of a difference, even though my gut, and I think a lot of others people's guts, would have said to go for it there.
Yeah, I agree. That was just such a, and I think we saw the same thing in the 2016 or 17 CFL West Division final. Jason Maas, the head coach at the time, elected to kick a field goal as opposed to going for it. And of course, they ended up losing that game. It's always tough because then if you don't get the points, or if you don't get the first down in that situation, I believe it might have even been 4th and goal, and you don't get the touchdown at that juncture, now you're really hurting because the offense gets the ball back and they can drive. So it looked like they put faith in their defense to make the play. And I guess that's where I see a lot of kind of egregious errors on coaches' parts, where they put a little too much faith into the defense, right? And they say, we'll take the points and our defense will get a stop, or, we'll pin them on the one. I know Pete Carroll did that plenty of times in the first half of this 2020 season, when the defense was literally on pace to shatter records for being the worst historical defense in NFL history. And we'll pin them on the one, kind of old school thinking, we'll flip the field, and then the team would drive 99 yards. I forget what game that happened. I think it might have been Arizona. And it's just, you're kind of left sitting there like, well, you have Russell Wilson as your quarterback. And I know Seahawks Twitter and Ben Baldwin and some of the more bigger names in the analytics community there were always kind of taking Pete to task on that. So is using these kind of different formulas, is there a point where we can say, hey, if it's 4th and 3 or 4th and 4 and you're on the other side of the team's 50, it's almost always a sure bet to go for it? Or does it matter how good your defense is? Does it matter who your quarterback is? What have you seen based on your kind of findings?
Yeah, for sure. So in generalities, as soon as you start looking at it as team specific and you're putting in very specific variables such as weather or who you're playing or the quality of your opponent, et cetera, you're now limiting your sample size so much that any conclusions you come to can very easily be questioned with that. So in terms of just looking at it across all data sets, that's really what I'm trying to do now with high school football data in Canada and the US. And based off of that, with LCI up here in Canada, I created essentially what you're talking about. It's a basic chart saying, okay, this is how many yards we need for a first down. this is the field position grouped by 10-yard increments. And more or less, the majority of them are go decisions. And then a lot of them are actually pretty strong go, meaning it's 2, 3 estimated points, or sorry, 0.2, 0.3 estimated points. And then in the US, in high school football down there, the charts look pretty similar, surprisingly, given that it's pretty much a completely different game. And the quality of opponents and the quality of play from one Canadian high school and one American high school can vary so drastically. But overall, those are pretty much, once you get past half, even on your own, like 45-ish, you can start saying, okay, if we have anything like 3rd and 5 in the Canadian game, we should be going for it. And then once you know that, you can almost set up your 1st and 2nd down play calls to the point where you don't necessarily have a 3rd and 5, but you have a 3rd and 4, or you have a 3rd and 3 or whatever, and you can start taking some more shots and hopefully being more explosive because of that.
Wow, that's incredible findings. Ozzy, it looked like you had something.
I did. Yeah, I was going to, I actually read this earlier. It might have been your most recent article, actually. But that was to your point. You were saying on like second and second and 3rd, and 2nd and 4th, and same thing with 3rd down, that it should be a run and you should be going for it in those cases. And that article, for those interested, is Pass Run Run, Calling a Canadian Football Offense. And I think that seeing that aggression is really good for the game in general too. Seeing these, especially now that analytics is kind of taking a step in the Canadian game, as you're kind of doing some of the heavy lifting on that. It's going to be cool to see how the teams adapt. And it's been 100 years in the league, and it's going to be cool if we can start seeing less and less of these going for the Rouge. And even though I love the Rouge, don't take it away from us, CFL and XFL. But I would like to see, I think it's really cool if we can get some more of these like go for it situations. It just creates so much of that intensity, and it kind of puts you on the edge of your seat, putting the game in the balance a lot of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Just from a fan's perspective, it is so much more fun when you have a do or die situation 10 times in a game versus having it once at the very end of the game when the game's kind of already decided, kind of not. But, and just one point on what you said with me doing the heavy lifting, that's very kind of you, but I definitely have to put Chris Clement up in there. He's been doing a ton of really cool stuff on Twitter with throwing the ball, pass, run stuff. And then also, I forget his last name, but I think his Twitter handle is at TSN Marshall. They've been doing a lot of really cool CFL stuff with some routes and pass, run, how far should you be passing, stuff like that. That's been really cool to see.
It's amazing the entry into like how specific you can get with the data, because I follow those gentlemen as well, and it's really insane where it's like, hey, this yardage, this depth of yardage passing is actually the most efficient. And I was even seeing that, I believe it was with Chris Clement's content. He's doing a series called Throw the Damn Ball, and we had a little back and forth on Twitter, just more conversational. There wasn't any debate because I'm very new to all this, so I'm not at liberty to debate anybody on this really. But he was saying, like eventually the pass to run splits he would like to see would be like 80-20, if not 90-10 in favor of passing to running in the Canadian game. Ozzy just mentioned your kind of formula, pass run in the Canadian game. Do you see it differently than Chris Clement, or is that just kind of, differences in data of what's available right now?
Well, with that throw the damn run, he's looking at CFL data. My latest article was using the U Sports data, so completely different leagues to start.
Yeah.
And then, but I believe he's also found at the U Sports level, first down should almost always be a pass. And then when it is short yardage, if you want first downs, then you run the ball. But if you want to score touchdowns, which I mean, ultimately is the point of an offense, you should be throwing the ball on that second and short. So that article I just wrote I was saying you should pass the ball on first down, get to 2nd and 4 or shorter, and then run the ball twice to get a first down. From an offensive coordinator standpoint, that is so hard to call an offense that's going to be 12, 15, 18 plays to score a touchdown. So Chris Clement has been arguing that it should be pass, 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 pass. And then when you have 3rd and 1, well, then QB sneak, because that thing's money in the CFL.
Absolutely.
So the 90-10, I don't know, maybe not. No team's really ever gone even close to that. So until we get a lot of a data set showing teams that are 90-10, 80-20, whatever it is, we don't actually know what that equilibrium point of optimal pass run ratio is. When I was at the University of Regina for 1 year, we had Keeman Shutter and Noah Picton. And it seemed like after every single game, I'd be reading the paper and it was like Noah Picton threw for 500 yards, Keeman Shutter threw for 500 yards. Like we would run the ball like 8 times a game in some games. And that's just how the offense was set up. And that year, that offense put up a lot of really big numbers. And our win percentage, I think, was 500 going into the playoffs. Does that mean passing the ball's bad? Not necessarily, because that's 1 year. But I mean, until we get to a point where those teams are doing it at a frequent level, we won't really know. Right now, we're just hypothesizing, hey, we should be passing the ball at least more than what we are right now.
I think this sets the table for a good transition into the pass versus run debate, as this has again taken over a lot of NFL circles, and it's really cool to see it in CFL circles. And many point to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers running the Grey Cup, where they say, "Oh, the weather gets cold." The old adage, playoff football, cold weather. You hand off the rock, you feed your running back. That's playoff football. It's whoever can run the ball and play strong defense. But as Chris pointed out to me, that it was more to do with Collaros coming in as he added a EPA expected points added. I forget the numbers, but it was significantly higher. Chris actually claimed it as a shitload more EPA than Chris Strevler was producing at that level. Can you speak to EPA at all and kind of how that incorporates into the current analytics field?
For sure. So EPA, as you said, is estimated points added. And the model in which to use it or to create it can vary very drastically. At this point, you should just have Chris Clement on, because I'm referencing him pretty much every single answer. He is a great Canadian analytics person. I can't recommend his stuff enough. But again, going to his blog, he actually looked at 4 different models at how to calculate EPA. And overall, all 4 performed fairly well. He found 2 that were a little bit better. I really don't want to get into the method behind it, because it's a lot of math and data science stuff that will lose the audience right away. But more or less, it's how many points can an offense expect to score given down and distance, field position, and then time remaining in the half. And then depending on who else is creating the model, they can put in things like timeouts remaining for each team, and just different things that you would expect to influence whether a team scores a touchdown this drive, next drive, 5 drives from now, whatever. But it's pretty much the points you can expect to score given down and distance, field position, and then whatever else you end up putting into the model.
That's incredible. It's amazing how far that stuff has come. So when you hear people come in and say, hey, or coaches say, we got to establish the run, right? We need to set the tone. We need to draw the safeties or linebackers in. We need to make sure they load up the box, and then we'll hit them with the play action. And, they won't see it coming because we've established the run. I know there's been some recent findings out there that's saying you don't actually have to establish a run game for play action to be successful. Do you see it similarly?
Absolutely. I believe we've probably looked at very similar studies, at least on Twitter, which pretty much use GPS player tracking. So at the NFL level, they have the next gen stat stuff with the chips and the players, and you can see where the players are on the field. And based off of that, there's been some studies showing that even without running the ball, when you go play action, linebackers still bite on the run fake. And there's been a lot of theories about why. I think the one I tend to go to the most is that coaches, like you said, establish the run. We got to run the ball. We need to stop the run. So defensive coaches, linebacker coaches have to come down here, fill your gap, stop the run at all costs. And because that coaching is so prevalent and it's been with those players for so long, even if the linebacker coaches in the NFL now are saying, okay, well, don't go on the run fake that hard, it's going to be that player's natural instinct to stop the run. So even without running the ball, as long as there's somewhat of a credible threat of running the ball, linebackers are going to come up, bite on that play fake, and then you can throw it past them. So you don't need to run. You just need that threat of running. And with that, go ahead, Steve.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, you can't have me back there at running back because then they're not biting on the play action.
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes to a conversation I've had with my mentor about you don't actually need to be able to do deep passes, medium passes, short passes to the sideline, over the middle. You don't need to be able to run outside, inside, off tackle. You don't need to be able to attack every single part of the field. You just need the threat that you're going to do that. Maybe we can't throw it deep and outside the numbers on the field side of the Canadian field because that is a very long throw, especially at the high school level. But if we throw it once a game, we probably don't complete any of it, but it keeps that corner playing it true and honest and not cheating a run and not cheating a screen or not cheating whatever else. As long as you have that threat there, then you're good from an offensive coordinator standpoint.
That's very interesting. I wanted to, I've been in and out just with the connection issues, but I wanted to go back really quickly if I could. You're talking about, this is way back now, it feels like, but the 80-20 passing and running ratio and 90-10. What are your thoughts on the idea of complementary football in terms of you run the ball to kind of shorten the game and stuff like that? And I know that you don't necessarily share the same thoughts as Chris Clement, so maybe it wouldn't be maybe you're in agreement with me on this one, but I feel like that's part of the reason why we haven't gone to that 80-20, 90-10 ratio of passing, because it kind of quickens up the game and then your defense is kind of hung out to dry in some cases.
Yeah, that's a really, really common viewpoint, and it's probably the most pushback I've had from other coaches I've talked to about it. My argument against it would be if both teams are passing 80-20, 90-10, both defenses are in the same situation, what does it matter? And then along the lines of that also is, if you're running the ball to chew up clock, but you're going to punt after 3 downs in the NFL, after 2 downs of running in the Canadian game, what does it matter if your defense was on the field for 2 minutes or 3 minutes of game time or 30 seconds of game time, when realistically they're going to be back on the field right away anyways? And then, like I said, the offense has to score. The whole point of an offense is to score points. So if you're running the ball to keep your defense on the sideline at the cost of you scoring points, is that really an efficient way of playing a game? I'd argue no. Maybe, like, obviously score, if you're in the fourth quarter up 10, yeah, you probably want to trade some clock for scoring 7 points. If you can trade 7 out of 10 minutes and score a field goal instead of a touchdown, yeah, probably that's good. But if you're in the first quarter and you're scoring a field goal after a 10-minute drive, does that really matter? Probably not. So
I would add to that, yeah, because I think we saw a lot of kind of more the anti-analytics crowd come out. And I don't want to say I was a part of that, but I looked at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers game against the Chiefs in the Super Bowl, for example, and you saw Fournette running wild. Brady didn't put up gaudy numbers. I think he was efficient in what they were executing, but many pointed like, hey, that was complimentary football. Their defense was elevated. They were playing a battered Kansas City offensive line. The running game was going. Fournette might get paid now, potentially by Seattle. And, Brady was efficient. He didn't try to do too much. He didn't make mistakes. So when you get that kind of pushback saying, hey, this is what wins playoff football, I guess it is are we missing something that Tampa Bay did that still supports kind of what the analytics community is, pushing for?
Well, I think the answer there's twofold. The first is what wins playoff games. That's such a small sample size. You have 3 games max in the NFL of a playoff game per team for a year. That compared to 16 regular season games, I mean, that's really small in terms of sample size there. In terms of Tampa Bay this last year, in the Super Bowl, I don't know what the actual yards per carry was. It felt like they were ripping it off at 6-7 yards a clip. If it was that, then I mean that EPA on for 2nd and 3 is going to be just as good, if not better, than throwing on first down. So if you can run the ball as efficiently as you can pass the ball, then it doesn't really matter. The reason the analytics community is so pass first is because passing the ball is so much more efficient and explosive than running the ball is on average. So if you're running the ball really, really well, then you don't need to pass because you're running the ball good enough to be just as good as if you're passing it. So it's not so much the analytics community is we hate the running back, we hate running the ball, da 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 da. It's more so we want efficient football and we want explosive football. And at the end of the day, I feel like fans should want that as well, because that's going to be a whole lot more exciting if you're getting 7, 8, 20 yards, whatever, rather than a 2-yard run on first down.
Right. That's very well said. Okay. I asked and answered. I really like what you said there. It's on average, that's kind of the whole mantra. And so teams like the Ravens that are so run heavy, it's just, that's why they're the only team in the league to do it, because it's not the most likely way of putting up the most points, I guess. And that's at the end of the day what analytics is trying to decipher, if that's fair to say.
Yeah, absolutely. And weirdly enough, the analytics community in large part loves the Ravens. You're looking at one of the most run heavy teams in the NFL, and the analytics community absolutely loves them because they're efficient. And a lot of that comes from running a unique scheme. They're running what a lot of offenses don't run, which leads to efficiency, which leads to good estimated points added, and ultimately helps them win games in the regular season.
I love that. And I think even like if you take that back to the Canadian game, I was looking at some of the splits, and Calgary, I believe, led the league in pass to run ratio in 2019. I think they believe they passed it 69% of the time and ran it 29% of the time. And then there's like a percentage kind of lost there due to like sacks and different things like that. But, so you can kind of see the success that they have. And I'm really interested to see what Dinwiddie implements in Toronto. They too had pretty pass to run heavy splits, but that team in general was just a mess in 2019. So, yeah. I mean, you got to have the talent to execute any kind of great scheme, let alone a pass heavy scheme that requires a lot of moving pieces, your pass protection to your receivers, to your quarterback.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's the biggest key in trying to apply NFL or CFL data to the university level or the high school level is we can't just look at the NFL and say X, and then that should apply to the high school level. We need to apply to what the players we have at the high school level, because, I mean, let's be honest, the talent discrepancy, even on a single team, and not even talking about team A versus team B, is so much wider than any professional league. So trying to take one thing from those leagues and apply it is going to be a huge challenge. And that's something I'm trying to do this off season. But I mean, it's hard. It's hard because the players change over every 3 years, every 4 years. And as a coach, you absolutely know that one year you might have a great set of receivers, and the next year you're going to be running the ball. So
that's the nicest way you can put it. The next year you're going to be running the ball. So can you speak to Matthew, the concept of building momentum or confidence and how that shifts in a game? I know that's something you wanted to touch on, and I know that's a lot of things too, where it's kind of an old adage for when you're watching TV, and it's like, oh, the Rough Riders have the momentum now. They just scored 21 straight points, a pick six, and maybe 2 passing touchdowns on their last 3 possessions kind of thing. And they're rolling and they have the momentum. And then all of a sudden, maybe they fumble. It's like, that's a momentum swing, and you hear it all the time. So is there data to back up the concept of momentum and the shifting of energy in a game, which doesn't seem quantifiable, but it's a lot of things. It's something that a lot of people like to point to, casual and the experts on TV as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think it's ever going to be able to be proven to exist. And it's definitely not going to be able to proven not to exist. Just based off of the nature of it is one of those things that will for sure never are going to be able to say 100% not a thing. That isn't going to be testable. In terms of momentum at professional, really not a thing, as in what I believe and what most of the data says. There's been quite a few academic studies that find that momentum at the professional league, whether it be momentum, hot hand theory, whatever, doesn't really exist, or at least isn't quantifiable in a manner that shows that it makes a significant impact on the game. At the youth level, though, one of my favorite studies, it was by Cotton, McIntyre, Nordstrom, and Price. They looked at youth golfers in the United States, and essentially the youth golfers ranged in the number of tournaments they played in from very few to quite a few. And these were not absolute amateurs. They were pretty good youth golfers. And what they found was the golfers who played in a lot of tournaments had no significant hot hand theory or momentum. The golfers that played in the few tournaments had very minor but significant hot hand, meaning that the more amateur the athlete, there's probably a greater hot hand theory or momentum, however you want to call it, in those who aren't as good, which they led to believe that, or which they in their discussion said that the reason momentum seems to be such a big thing amongst casual viewers is that they're all very amateur athletes. And because of that, they likely experience hot hand or momentum themselves. So they think professional athletes should also experience it. But in reality, one of the things that separates those great players from me eating a bag of chips, watching a football game, is that their mental game is so much better than mine, in addition to their amazing athletic and physical feats, obviously. But their mental game is also part of that as well.
With the hot hand theory, I might butcher this, but if I have this correct, that's like the concept of if you're shooting a basket, it has a 50-50 chance, so to speak, to go in the hoop, whether you've made 10 in a row or you've missed 10 in a row. The next shot, the previous shot has no bearing on the next shot. Do I have that in the ballpark?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. So you're saying at an amateur level, based on this study, that's actually more plausible than, Steph Curry or Russell Wilson making a throw.
Yeah, exactly.
That makes sense too, because there's going to be less variance among the pros than there is in the amateur. So that will be emphasized. That makes perfect sense.
All you have to do is come watch me play a pickup game of basketball, and you'll see that variance.
Oh yeah, buddy, don't talk to me about pickup basketball. I got PTSD from the last time I played. Oh man. Moving on. I'm not going to talk about the ugly picture of me dribbling a basketball. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on this, Matthew. There's going to be positions in football that get paid more because they're perceived to matter more. I was just wondering what positions from whether it's in the analytics community or whether it's a personal opinion, what positions matter more than others. There's some hot debate on Twitter and elsewhere, just that running backs don't really matter. So what are your thoughts on that? And then what are your thoughts on the positions?
Yeah, so on the running backs don't matter part, it's not that the analytics community hates running backs or doesn't think that Leonard Fournette doesn't deserve getting paid $100 million a year by the Seattle Seahawks this coming up year, or whatever they end up signing him to. but it's that there's value, and contracts in the NFL are kind of like stocks where there's an implicit value to something, and then with that there should be a price that you're going to pay for it. If you're looking at a stock and that you valued that stock at $5, you're not going to pay $100 a share for that. It doesn't make sense. And that's pretty much what the analytics community is trying to say with running backs, is that there's a value with them, and if you can get them at X dollar amount, then it's going to be good for your team. But if you're going to pay 2x what their intrinsic value is worth, then you're just wasting cap space when you could get 2 running backs that are what you value them to be the same, but then you have 2 instead of the 1 type thing with that. So it's not so much we hate a position, it's we're trying to put a dollar value to the position on it.
I think you make a good point because, Michael Lombardi was even saying, he was talking about Chris Carson being a free agent, and, he's a former 7th round pick. And he goes, it's not that I don't like Chris Carson. He goes, I have nothing against Chris Carson. I'm sure he's a great guy and I love the way he runs, but why would I pay him 10, 12 or 14 a year, whatever he's looking after? Clearly out of Seattle's price range, didn't want to tag him, even at the rate that would have paid him, I believe, 8 or 9. So, why do that when I can go get someone similar in the draft, which would, I'd be paying pennies on the dollar, because again, the draft is almost like, low risk, high reward. If you take a running back in the 5th round and it turns out to be, well, in Seattle's case back in 2017, a 7th round, and it turns out to be Chris Carson. And then you see them take Rashad Penny in the 1st round. And I'm only speaking about the Seahawks because that's just what's familiar to me, but it's, I'm sure there's case studies across the NFL of, these high paid running backs. We just saw Green Bay choose to pay Aaron Jones over Corey Linsley as well. And maybe that's something you can kind of get into as far as, what teams value running backs differently and where that capital should be going in roster construction.
Yeah. So with the running back part, the other thing is that I believe it's PFF. I'm not 100% sure on that, but there's been some studies showing that how well you run the ball, it matters more with how many defenders are in the box and how good your O-line is, and less to do with how good the actual running back is. So if you can manipulate running efficiency by going spread, like if you're Baltimore Ravens and you go empty and you have Lamar Jackson against a 5-man box and you can run QB draw with Lamar Jackson one-on-one with a middle linebacker or a strong safety, your running efficiency is probably going to be pretty good. But that's because you're manipulating that defensive box. You don't have to pay a running back to do that. The other part is your offensive line, and that kind of brings in strong versus weak link systems. And really that means if you have a weak link system, if you have one bad player, your entire system's going to get exposed. So defense as a whole is a weak link system, meaning if you have, in Canada, 11 A-plus defenders, but then you have one F defender, you're going to pick on that F defender all game long. Whether it be a DN, you're going to run at him, a corner, you're going to throw at him, whatever the case, you're going to bully that player until he's on the sideline because he doesn't want to play anymore. Offensive line is also a weak link system where if you have one really bad offensive lineman, you're going to have a Khalil Mack or an Aaron Donald lined up against that offensive tackle or guard or whatever, and it's going to pretty much shut down an entire half of the field because you won't be able to block him at all. And with those weak link systems, you want B+ B players all across the board. If you have average, slightly above average everywhere there, you're going to be pretty good. Whereas a strong link system is if you have one bad player, that's not really going to influence too much, but one really good player can make a huge difference. So Seattle, DK Metcalf, stud receiver, he's going to make a huge difference in their passing game. Way bigger difference than if the receivers for Seattle were 3 times David Moore. It's David Moore, correct?
Yeah, David Moore. Yeah.
If you have 3 David Moores at receiver, i.e. the New England Patriots last year, you're not going to have a good passing game. But if you have Green Bay where you have Adams, who's an absolute stud, one of the best receivers in the game, he's going to make your passing game so much better by himself that even the other receivers don't even have to be average. They can be below average and you'll still be okay.
That's the strong link system. Sorry, the second half of that.
Correct. So then with that, you want to pay those really good players in a strong link system. You're going to pay Devontae Adams however much he wants because he makes your passing game so good. You're not going to pay a running back or a tackle $50 million a year, because if you have one tackle making $50 million, you're going to have the other tackle making minimum wage, and well, then you have the Kansas City Super Bowl fiasco. So not ideal.
You describing the strong link system versus the weak, I can't help but think about the Patriots signings at wide receiver, how they're just kind of like that B to B plus at best type of receiver. And so it kind of seems like they're going that weak link style. And I mean, I know it's just kind of, it's just the way to describe like the correlation, but that's just kind of how it seems with, I feel like the Patriots maybe should have gone with more of like a strong link type of guy, but I mean, I digress. It's just you saying that kind of makes me a little nervous about the Patriots wide receiver room now.
I mean, that's been Bill Belichick's entire career, though. He views everything as a weak link system, where if you have a team offense, defense, everything of B plus, and then Tom Brady as your quarterback, you'll be fine. And when you're, in my opinion, the greatest coach in NFL history, as much as I love Bill Walsh, I have to give it to Bill Belichick. I mean, you can make some A players out of that B plus range when just with your coaching abilities.
Absolutely. And I think what makes Bill Belichick so great, and I can't believe I'm saying this now, but I love Bill Belichick, but I just hate admitting that to Ozzy. But I mean, we've seen him adapt, right? We saw him bring in Randy Moss in 2007, and we've seen him, they drafted Rob Gronkowski. I'm not sure if they knew what he was going to become, but you even look to their free agent signings over the last 2 days now, bulking up that tight end group with Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry. And, regardless of how you view Cam, if you want to say he's a B or B plus player, he's obviously not what Tom Brady was in that system. You can kind of see Bill flipping the script now, saying, okay, now we have to build around this quarterback because we're not sure if Cam at this stage in his career can go make those other players great. I mean, he tried his darndest with the receivers he had at his disposal last year. So we're now going to support him with a more all-encompassing supporting cast. And right now the starting looks like with that tight end group.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, we can say that the receivers they just signed are B plus, whatever grade you want to put on them. They're a full letter grade over what they had last year. So, I mean, You're going from whatever you want to call those receivers last year in terms of a grade, you at least upgraded receiver and tight end. So maybe you're not looking at an absolute stud like a Will Fuller they could potentially sign. Maybe they draft a receiver in round 1 or 2 that ends up being an A plus playmaker for them. There's still opportunities for them out there, but at least they upgraded from C, D plus, whatever you want to grade those.
Yeah, absolutely. That's totally fair.
I think with the discussion around the running backs, it almost makes you feel like the CFL, and maybe it's just the nature of the 3-down game compared to the 4-down game. But I remember growing up, even the saying, like if a running back moved on to another team, it's like, oh, you know what, American running back is a dime a dozen, right? Like you just go get another one. And that makes me think like now I'm hearing that kind of in NFL circles. And, it's not to discount, the greats like Andrew Harris or, Corey Sheets in Saskatchewan years ago or John Cornish. But it makes you wonder if the CFL, have you noticed, or is it mostly due in part of the CFL just being 3 downs that they've been ahead of the curve analytically, or is there still teams in the Canadian game that are kind of rooted in the rudimentaries of football of establishing the run and the running backs matter sort of thing?
I wouldn't say that the CFL is way behind the times in it, but I also wouldn't say they're where they could be to be the most efficient. I think the big part of that, like you said, is the 3-down game where they have to pass more in order to have some sort of an offense with it. And then just thinking about, brought up John Cornish as a Stamps fan, like John Cornish was a great running back, great Canadian running back, but I believe almost immediately after the Stamps moved on from him, they brought in Jerome Messam, who had pretty much just as much success. Granted, he's an American running back, I believe.
Yeah. I believe
I think
Messam's, he might have been Canadian as well, but
either way,
yeah.
Messam had pretty much just as much success as Cornish did. And I mean, you just moved on from one running back to the next. And then again, they're just moving on. The big thing with that, I think, is what some coaches might call the RPO game. They're not necessarily true RPOs, but the fake inside zone with a slot receiver coming across the formation, slipping the defensive end, and the little dump off pass to him. That's considered a pass. In like reality, is that a run? Is that a pass? You could probably argue it's just as efficient as a run play is. So while the pass run ratio might be differently, in all matters of what actually is a run, what's the pass, maybe it's not as different than the NFL as we might think. And like I said, Chris Clement and TSN Marshall probably have looked at that a lot more than I have. I haven't looked at any of the CFL data, but just based off of like you, I grew up watching the CFL a lot, and just based off of my gut feeling off of that.
Though that's really well thought out. And I had one more question related to the running back while we're on the topic is you see a lot of like, oh, this running back, he has great hands. You can use him with dump offs in the backfield, like throws or screens as an extension of the running game. Do you have any thoughts on, using screens, hitches, or running back passes as an extension of a running game? Or are you better off just pushing the ball downfield to your receivers, no matter how good your running back might be at catching and evading defenders in open space?
Yeah, so PFF with the NFL stuff showed the passes to like Christian McCaffrey, who a lot would say is one of the best pass catching running backs in the NFL. Not very efficient at all. You're way better off throwing the ball deep and downfield and into that intermediate 10 to 19 yard zone. Chris Clement with his throw the damned ball Twitter series that he's been going on, pretty much the same thing. Screens are very inefficient. You're way better off throwing it deep and throwing it deep often. I think the screens at, say, a high school level are going to be a lot more efficient. Based off of what I've seen up in Canada at the high school level, a lot of times the running back is one of the better athletes. And if you can get him involved in the passing game via screens, via bubbles, via whatever type of passing game that way, you're going to get a good athlete in space where there is going to be a big talent discrepancy between a linebacker trying to cover a running back. Whereas at the NFL, CFL level, that talent discrepancy isn't nearly as big, which means it's not very efficient.
Really well said. Then that's very interesting when it comes to McCaffrey, because we saw Mike Davis go in when they were injured, and that offense, based on the eye test, which I know we hate, but it didn't look like it missed a beat with him in there, and now he might even get paid for his work in that offense.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know what like their PFF grades were, their EPA based off of the McCaffrey Davis splits, but based off of the eye test, I'd 100% agree with you there.
The old reliable eye test.
Yeah.
Ozzy, go ahead.
No, I was just agreeing.
Oh, okay.
I might be behind you guys.
Oh, no problem. So I guess as we kind of wind down the interview, and this was super informative. We're definitely going to have you back on because I could talk about this for 4 hours, but I don't know if anyone wants to listen to a 4-hour episode of any podcast. Maybe some people do, but so for coaches that are, coaching at Bantam, anywhere from Pee-wee to the high school level, where can they start incorporating analytics? Because we've spoken at length and you've mentioned that there's a kind of separation between what happens in the pros and what happens at the high school and kind of Bantam level. Where can junior and amateur coaches implement analytics? I know that's something you're actively working on right now, but if you could give a piece of advice to up and coming coaches out there on how to incorporate analytics into their game, what would you recommend? Where should they start?
Yeah, like I said, I've been working on that, and in 2, 3, 4 months, hopefully I have a lot more on that. But I think the biggest and most easily implementable one is to go for it. If you're in Canada, go for it on third down, because especially at the bantam level, I coached bantam in 2019 in that last season pre-COVID, and we punted twice, I think, all year. And on those punts, we netted, I think, like 10 yards. So
Oh, wow.
if you're gaining 10 yards at the bantam level punting the ball, why? Just why? I don't understand that. Like, just from using the bantam example, no analytics. We had, I believe it was like 3rd and 10 on the minus 15-yard line, something like that. And we scored a touchdown on that play. Like, it was an 85, 95-yard touchdown, as opposed to giving them the ball on the 20-yard line because we netted 5 yards off a punt. Could we have turned the ball over? Yeah, but at that point, what is 5 yards? Probably not very much. So just go for it on third down, because that, honestly, the punters in Canada, high school level below, unless you have someone who's an NCAA youth sports punter, you're not going to gain that much more from punting. You're just not, because you don't have the leg strength, you don't coach it. And if you don't punt it ever, then you spend that additional time in practice on offense going for it, and you're going to get that much more offensive practice, and hopefully your offense reflects that too.
I love that, because there's nothing more infuriating, especially in the Canadian game, is punting the football, having it up in the air, screaming from the sidelines, give 5 yards, give 5 yards. They don't do it. And so then you tack on 15 yards from where you punted, and you might even end up netting 0 yards from when it's all said and done after that penalty, because it's 15 yards, I believe, in the air. It's only 5 yards on the no yards call when the ball has touched the ground. Either way, you're giving up yards on an already 10 to 15 yard punt at best, again, unless you have that maybe former soccer star that comes over and decides to kick and punt for you. But that's really great advice. I love that too. It's easily implementable. You might anger your head coach if you're the assistant on the sideline saying, hey, let's go for this thing. But I really think you raised some great points there. I love that. As we continue to wrap it up, and I'm not sure where Ozzy is on the leg, but I'll jump into it. Matthew, you've clearly had a very diverse experience in football on the analytics side and on, the coaching side and the personal aspects. And I'm sure you have that connection with the players as well. What's the greatest lesson football has taught you up until this point? And is that something you would like to share with us?
Yeah, so I think the biggest part on that is how important communication is, and how different that communication is going to look person to person. As a player, I kind of understood that. As a coach, I started to understand that more and more. But it hasn't really been until I've started digging into the analytics and trying to convince other coaches about what I've been finding, and that they're wrong, more or less, that how I approach that conversation is going to make a huge difference. And the way in which to talk to people and make points and have healthy discussions, and the importance of having those healthy discussions and debates, and how important that is in coming to the most efficient result. Just how important that communication is overall, and how differently that's going to look, whether you and me are talking, or me and my mentor are talking, or me and a player are talking. It's all going to look differently. We're all in it for the same purpose: to grow the Canadian game, to make Canadian football as good as it can be, to make our team as good as it can be. But those conversations are going to look completely different based off of who's having them. And I don't know if I would have fully grasped that without being involved in the football community.
Absolutely. It's really cool to see, like, we followed each other on Twitter, and I just saw like the work you were doing, and we, I guess for those that don't know, we met at the University of Lethbridge in our time there in a business class. I remember Zach introducing us, and he's like, oh, we're talking football. And Zach's just such a good, like, he'll go and like just speak to everybody, and all of a sudden we have new friends and connections like this. So really glad we're able to do this together. And this certainly won't be the last time we bring you on, with the exception of this last question, Matthew. does ketchup belong on Kraft dinner? This will dictate the future of discourse in Canadian football on this podcast, on this answer.
Yeah, so I've listened to some of your past podcasts, heard that you guys asked this question, and talked to my wife about it, and I think I came up with the best answer you can get.
Okay.
Mac and cheese, especially Katie, needs something. Needs something. Whether it be ketchup, if you're a ketchup person. I like heat, so I'll put on Frank's hot sauce, I'll put on sriracha.
Nice.
I think those are the adult versions of ketchup. So I guess, yeah, ketchup belongs on it, but to me, mac and cheese needs hot sauce.
Mac and cheese without any kind of additional sauce is an offense without a passing game. So
Love
That's
that.
facts.
Matthew, and where can we find your work? Obviously, Ozzy plugged your website earlier on in the episode, and we're going to have all this in the show notes. But for anyone listening, where can they find you on social media, and where can they find your work specifically?
Yeah, so on Twitter, I believe my handle was at Matthew_Sentis. And then my website where I do analytics is bigplayaction.wordpress.com. And those are pretty much the two main social media sites you can find any football analysis from me.
That's fantastic. And as we alluded to, please check out Matthew's latest article. Definitely really informative, and he has lots of other good ones in there as well. You had a good one on Bill Parcells that I really enjoyed on some of his adages and how they apply to the modern game. So Matthew, will definitely have you back on. Your answer on the Katie solidified it, but regardless of how that went, it is definitely going to be something that we look forward to conversing in the future on. Best of luck. Hopefully we're able to coach some football in this spring or fall, and looking forward to seeing your findings and research on how analytics applies to the rest of the high school game. And we'll definitely share that when your research is more in progress or even complete. So thank you again for coming on.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I got to say the old thing. Good night and Godspeed. That's me. Poor hosting qualities there, but
SMH.
yeah. Take care, everyone.